Good afternoon. Welcome to the little program we call Lunch with the Books. Thanks for coming today. Before we get to our guest for today, I would like to introduce my partner in crime for the committee about Wheeling Reads, because we are officially going to announce that today. Here is Dr. Christina Fazonic. I said it right this time.
No, it's just on it. That's all right. Hello, everybody. We are getting ready to launch. Are we going to talk about the book for just a second before we bring Mark up? So we have been meeting since September to talk about our latest initiative. We tried this back in 2019 with another book, but the pandemic, like it did everything else, just killed that. So, no pun intended, that's a terrible joke. Anyways, and but we met starting in September, and we tried to figure out a book that we thought all of Wheeling, all of our community would like to read. And we finally, after months of talking and thinking about it, chose this amazing book by Jennifer Haig called Heat and Light. And it's about the fracking industry, but it's a novel. And Jennifer Haig is an absolutely amazing writer. She's from Cambria County, Pennsylvania. She now lives in Boston. And this book is absolutely amazing. One of her traits as a writer, one thing she does very well, is get inside her characters' heads in a way that I've never seen. Even if she doesn't like the character, even if she doesn't like what they have to say, she tries to represent them, and these are her words, in the way that she thinks they would like to be represented, which is an amazing thing to do, and that's very difficult in writing or in any other way. So I don't want to talk about this much longer because I want to bring up our West Virginia Poet Laureate, Mark Harshman, who's going to talk a little bit about Wheeling Reads. Do you want to add anything else, Sean? You do? Okay, Jean. Jean's on the committee too, along with Hal, and there's other committee members here too.
If you have a library card, you can get this book online free, or also an audiobook free through the library.
Yes, through the Hoopla app.
Our Indian. Pardon? Our Indian. Oh, yeah. And so Jennifer Haig will be here.
Yes, that's right. Jennifer Haig will be here.
Everybody will read it.
Right, she will be here. The author will be here on September 9th for a book festival, and she'll be talking with everybody about her work and some other things. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mark Harshman, who doesn't need much of an introduction in this room.
Thanks, Christina.
Thank you for being here.
Oh, no, you're welcome. I don't have a whole lot to say other than this is an exciting program, and I hope Sean's not expecting me to have a whole lot to say. But no, it really does. Jennifer Haig coming here is a real coup. It's not only a good novel, an excellent novel, but it's also incredibly important, it seems to me, to have a conversation like this living where we do here in northern West Virginia, where the impact of the fracking industry has been probably more extensive than any of us realize. It had more profound effects than any of us yet realize. I'm also excited, though, about all the, how shall I call the supplementary programs that are going to be going on around Wheeling Reads. And Sean, here's where you're going to need to help me. I know we're going to convene a panel at this hour, I presume, or for Lunch with Books coming up, and we'll be discussing this graphic novel titled Here by Richard McGuire. And it, too, is a true gem, and the story behind it is too long for me to recite now. You have to come to the panel. But it is not about fracking, per se, but it is about here. It's about being in one place. And it reminded me, and I cannot find the exact quotation, but it reminded me of something that either Charles Olson or Paul Metcalf once said, the Black Mountain poets I'm referring to. And they said, you start here, where you stand, what's below your feet? Who put in this floor? What was here before this floor was here? What's in this soil? What's deeper into this soil? Who are the people that walked here before us? And in that sense, we're going to be looking at a single room in a single house, primarily, in this graphic novel here. And the note I made after reading it the first time is it calls us to pay attention. And surely that's the kind of thing we want to be doing when Wheeling Reads convenes, is to pay attention. In this instance, particularly, to pay attention to where we are and all that is happening going on around us, which includes the fracking industry. So I think, is that enough said? Sean, if you do me the favor, you might want to mention some point. I know on the panel I will be joined by Danny Boyd, who is a Fulbright winning filmmaker, several of whose films have become cult classics, who, though, went from there to write at least two marvelous graphic novels, also addressing environmental issues, including mountaintop removal, mining. So it'd be a treat to have Danny on the panel with me, who's also an old friend. And I forget who else is be joining us.
Mary Ellen Cassidy.
Oh, Mary Ellen. Of course, we all know Mary Ellen, who knows more about this subject than I could ever dream to.
And Dr. Marie Cummings, she's an archaeologist. She will be here for that as well, along with.
Those of you who came to, People's University, Ancient History of Memory, Mary Cummings. She's great. So she'll be on the panel.
Great, good. Well, mark your calendars is all I can say. And welcome. Good to have you here with us, sir. So
Thanks.
you're welcome.
Thanks, Mark. Okay, so that makes it official. We want you to, like Gene said, you can get unlimited copies of this book, whether it's in audio book form or ebook form, online on Hoopla. Also, West Virginia Deli has the audio book. So there's no excuse for not being able to get the book. And this is a large type copy you can check out if you want. I'll leave it up here. The other two copies are checked out. This room, speaking of here, was once a cemetery. So we are sitting in a cemetery. And then it was a rail yard. Most of you know that, yeah, for the B&O. So it has undergone some changes. And the book Mark was talking about goes back 100,000 years or more to look at that same area. And of course, the human impact is part of the story. Now, our guest today has a similar theme, and so we thought it was appropriate to launch this Wheeling Reads while Anthony is here. He is a professor of English at Marshall University, where he teaches literature and creative writing. His book is called All Lives Begin with Truth, which dramatizes the complexities of natural gas extraction, its legalities and impact on a small town's economy, infrastructure, and surrounding environment. So very familiar to us from three different distinct perspectives. Here is Anthony Viola.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you, Christina, for helping me set this up, and Mark, and everyone else who's here, and everyone else who's been contributing. Jennifer Hay's book is really good, so I'm actually going to start off with a slideshow that sort of introduces my approach. It'll be rather short, and then I'm going to do some readings. So let's make sure this comes up. Yeah. So this is, and I'm honored to be the speaker or the presenter for the launch of this. So I'm going to be talking about my novel, All Lives Begin with Truth. It was released a year ago from Black Rose Writing. And a lot of people ask me about the title of the book, and I realized after I had gotten the book published that I'm essentially borrowing from Winesburg, Ohio. And if anyone's ever read Winesburg, Ohio, the characters in those books are living false lives. So this is where I got the title from. I've taught Lawrenceburg, Ohio so many times. And I'm just down the road, so to speak, at Marshall University. And by the way, Wheeling is a beautiful, beautiful little city. So I'm happy to be here. Okay, so a couple of things I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to try to explain hydraulic fracturing, which is what fracking really is, how it can affect politics in U.S. small town. And a lot of this is covered in Jennifer's book as well. Just a brief history of the representation of energy extraction in the arts, and then some context from my novel, and then a reading excerpt. So you may not be able to see these graphics, but fracking is essentially, or hydraulic fracturing, you might be able to see a little bit of that. It involves vertical drilling, but then it also primarily involves horizontal drilling, and that can cause some issues because the restrictions on drilling are mostly for vertical drilling. So there are codes and enforcement policies, but some of them don't apply to horizontal drilling, which is predominantly what fracking is. So what happens is companies will take water, sand, and chemicals, and they're not the friendly chemicals, and there are a good amount of them because they use a lot of water, and they force water down a pipe vertically to penetrate a shale basin, because underneath the shale basin are pockets of natural gas. So once that shale basin has been penetrated, then pipes can go horizontally, and then all that gas can come up. And sometimes it's called fracking fluid, the water, the sand, and the chemicals. Sometimes that they retrieve all of it, sometimes they don't, and it stays down in the ground, and that's not a good thing. This is an image of a well tower. That's something you might see at a fracking site. The image is far away, but there's machinery all around it. And there's another example of all the diesel machinery and pipes and whatnot. So it's a very combustible type of environment. There's a lot of noise, a lot of diesel fuel being burnt off. So it creates quite a bit of health issues. Regarding the economy, there's always the promise when an energy company comes in that the local economy is going to be stimulated. That's true for some, but not for most. So like restaurants would probably benefit, hotels, people who have to have rentals, because these workers make so much money in a short span that they'll just spend their money because it's hard work. Unfortunately, though, there's a lot of residual damage in the infrastructure. If you realize the amounts of water that have to be transported, that means a lot of truck traffic. So that becomes an issue. And of course, there's the combustion from all the diesel and stuff like that. So there's chances of ground level ozone for air pollution. There's possibilities of water being polluted, and the wildlife in Kentucky, at least when I was writing this novel, in Kentucky, as I was doing research, I learned that fracking fluid is often reused for another site. And in Kentucky at the time, a mud pit was acceptable to store your fracking fluid. And a mud pit is essentially a ditch with plastic liner, and it's got toxic chemicals in it. So you can imagine how that's not a good thing. And sometimes what companies will do in order to get in and get in there and kind of swoop in, maximize their profit and leave to satisfy the stockholders, is use psychological operations, pitting people against one another, using propaganda, and that's what's used in the time of warfare. So that's kind of scary to see that they actually do that. So the brief history, and this is sort of an inclusive representation of energy extraction. Some of you probably have read Kettle Bottom it's a book of poems by Diane Gilliam. It deals with the coal mining wars in the 20s. And along with that is John Sayles' film, Matawan. Very powerful, very sort of emotional film. And then some of you may have read Strange as This Weather Has Been by Anne Pancake, which dealt with the Buffalo Creek slurry impoundment disaster. Really, really, really good book. This is one of the ones that's probably not as known, Lost Mountain by Eric Ries from University of Kentucky. I got to meet Eric Ries, and this is investigative journalism, where he chronicles mountaintop removal, strip mining, and happens to be Lost Mountain, and he documents it, and he goes on and explains exactly what strip mining and mountaintop removal is all about. And then, of course, one of the main reasons why I'm here, Heat and Light, Jennifer Hay. And I read this as I was revising my book. And there were some really fascinating things in this book. one of the scariest things is when she brings in the scientists who are sort of corrupted and bought out by the energy companies to create data that favors their agenda. That is, to me, that's very shocking, because now you can't trust, the scientists anymore. And then lastly, there's a novel called Sugar Run by Misha Marin, 2019. She's Appalachian, and although the focus is not fracking, it is present in the 2007 time period in rural West Virginia. So the context for my novel, Sean has already talked a little bit about this, but I have the physical setting. It's a fictional town called West York, Kentucky. It's on the western part of Kentucky. It's actually in the central time zone, which, as I was reminded myself as I was doing research, that Kentucky actually does, part of it is in the central time zone. It's essentially Uniondale and Henderson combined, if you go on the map and look at it. And the temporal time frame is 2014 to 2016. And there are three distinct perspectives, three protagonists. The novel starts off with Eris Carroll. She's a young activist from out of town. There's Lionel Boone, who's probably how the story came together was with him. He's an ex-coal miner, and he sort of summons Eris. And then there's Cass Taylor. She's a waitress, and she's married to an unemployed ex-coal miner who has been known for having several affairs in the town, and she has to sort of live with that sort of public disgrace. And that's where I got some of my images from. So just exit out of that. Okay, I'm not sure if that's still going to be on there or not. So I'm going to read a few excerpts. I'm going to read from each of the perspectives. As I mentioned, the novel takes place in a fictional town, western Kentucky, called West York. The basic plot involves an energy company who arrives with the intention of fracking the local terrain near the town, which sets in motion people who are for and people who are against their presence. And one of the reasons why people are against them or upset about this is because nearly 20 years earlier, another energy company strip mined a nearby mountain, which is called Clay Mountain, through mountaintop removal, and which caused significant devastation and even death. And the way this company went about this made it so that the town had no legal recourse for reparations as a shell game process. They open up, under one name, and then they file Chapter 11, and they somehow get away from all the legal repercussions. And Eris Carroll starts the novel. She's a 32-year-old activist. She's got a very judgmental tone to her, and I think I'm born and raised in New York, like the metropolitan area, so I think that's where she gets that from. That's how I feed that into it. The second perspective is from Lionel Boone, a 54-year-old ex-coal miner who's, his body's starting to break down, and clearly I think that's myself as well. Not that I'm a coal miner, but I'm getting older and my body's starting to, I'm starting to feel the aches, the bumps and bruises more these days. And he's the sole survivor of a kettle bottom. And a kettle bottom is when miners dig on too far underneath petrified, I think it's a petrified oak tree or petrified tree. They don't realize it, and the tree collapses on them, and it causes a mine collapse. So he actually survives that. And again, the third is from Cass Taylor. She's a local in her early 40s and has to deal with the public shame of her husband's ongoing affairs. So I'll be reading from all three perspectives. I'll pause every so often to give context because I'm doing sections from chapters. There's one part where there's some foul language. It's very brief, but it kind of fits the scenario. And just to give you, again, an idea, fracking involves horizontal drilling as opposed to vertical drilling. And again, there's chemicals and sand that it's forced in there and into the ground and breaks up the shale basin, and all the natural gas is ready at that point. So the novel starts with Eris. It starts in November 2014. This is after the energy company has already established a presence, is already erecting well sites. When we get to Boone, it's going to jump back to June of 2014 when the surveying crew first shows up. And then when we get to Cass's section, it's September when the energy company is already starting to lay the groundwork for multiple wells. Okay, so chapter 1, Eris, November 2014. 28 hours on a Greyhound from Houston to Western Kentucky was bad enough, but throw in the rancid bathroom with no toilet paper, the screaming 5-year-old, the rambunctious 8-year-old, and the trip evolved into an eloquent nightmare. Eris Carroll had boarded the bus at the downtown depot at 2 a.m. on Thanksgiving. In the first 2/3 of the trip, she relaxed, read, and slept in peace. But after midnight, she heard the 5-year-old crying for her baby, a doll, Eris assumed, and felt the 8-year-old kicking the back of her seat. Apparently, the young mother and children, no father traveled with them, had been picked up at a stop along the way while Eris was asleep, and she never heard the family board. It was moments like these when she wondered why women had children. She never had that urge when she was younger, and now nearing the age of 32, still nothing. Since she lived in mostly conservative areas, people were always surprised to hear about her choices. A few warned her that time was running out. Some felt sorry for her she had not been blessed with such fine gifts. Others admitted it was God's will and that she should be patient because he might not have given up on her just yet. Eris learned early on not to argue with people over their beliefs. You choose your battles, the ones you know you have a shot at winning, the ones you are the most passionate about. But what enraged her was how society tried to control her body. She was still young and always told she was attractive, so she received a lot of attention. Until now, it seemed everyone saw her body as a vessel to be colonized, not something connected to her mind and spirit, not something she had possession of, something they had a plan for. Women were preoccupied with what came out of her body, while men were preoccupied with what they could put in it. So this section goes on for a while. We'll get some character background. There's an important character mentioned. His name is Todd Giles. It's Eris's ex. He's the one that, when she got involved in the movement, so to speak, to be an activist, they started dating, and he's been very influential. He's a bit more radical. So the bus has arrived, and this is where she's meeting Lionel Boone, because Lionel Boone is going to pick her up from the bus depot. Once the bus pulled into the depot, the driver announced they would be parked for about 15 minutes to allow passengers to exit and board. It didn't surprise Eris that only 2 other people got off the bus. She stretched her legs while waiting for the driver to retrieve her duffel bag. It wasn't too cold out, but maybe in the low 60s. She had on a fleece over a sweatshirt and held her handbag close to her chest, her tablet tucked inside. An older man approached her, walking with a slight limp, favoring his left leg. He looked to be in his 50s, wearing jeans, cowboy boots, a flannel shirt, and a jacket. Lionel Boone, the man Eris had talked to, the man who had reached out to Todd about fracking going on near where he lived. Eris didn't know what to expect from Boone. She had only one conversation with him, and he seemed anxious, uncertain about talking to her. He introduced himself, and they shook hands. She commented on his accent, and he turned away. She embarrassed him with that remark, and immediately felt at ease, seeing how he could not hide his shame. His face still turned away, he offered to carry her duffel bag, and before she responded, he already grabbed it and slung it over his shoulder. "This way," he said. He hobbled toward the parking lot, and Eris followed as he guided her to a beaten-down Ford pickup with body rot near the wheel wells. He placed the bag into the back of the cab and offered up the passenger side. She was hesitant at first, seeing the condition of the truck, but figured it couldn't be any worse on the inside. She was wrong. The dashboard had several horizontal cracks, and there was wiring poking through. She tossed her handbag on the bench seat, sat, and grabbed the seatbelt as he slipped his key into the ignition. The truck hiccuped before starting. He looked over at her as if to apologize, but quickly turned away. She found his shyness, especially for someone his age, endearing, and again felt at ease. "So you're an activist," he said. "Actually, I'm a textbook editor and reviewer." Eris tried fastening her safety belt, but couldn't find the part to clip the belt to. "At least that's what pays the bills." Boone nodded as he pulled out of the parking lot and onto the road. "That's right," he said. "You said you were with Earth First." That's a movement, not an organization. Only volunteers. I researched your website. He gestured to the seatbelt. And that's broken, by the way. Eris looked at Boone, but he kept his eyes on the road. Isn't that illegal, she asked. Lots of things are illegal, he said. Eris thought about Todd, who couldn't make the trip. He'd been arrested for trespassing and vagrancy, both trumped-up charges. She hadn't told Boone that when they talked. Instead, she said he needed to check up on a protest for an international pipeline in Nebraska, one Todd had been involved with in the past. The way I figure it, Boone continued, in the larger scheme of things, what I'm doing ain't hurting much of anyone. Unless you drive this rattletrap into a gully, or hit another car, or God forbid, a building or something. Boone focused on the road as the terrain became more deserted. There were fewer buildings, and in the distance, Eris spotted several wellheads coated in verdigris. They looked stagnant, forgotten, their purpose no longer valued. He quickly looked at Eris. We just met, he said, and then turned back to the road. This is my truck. Eris was silent for a moment. Sorry, she said. It was a long bus ride with a screaming kid in a filthy bathroom with no toilet paper, and I haven't showered in 2 days. Boone looked at her as he accelerated a little. It's okay, he said. So what can you tell me about this movement that you're in? So that ends the first chapter, and then I'm going to read parts of the second chapter, and that'll be done with Eris. And it starts off with her backstory about how she gets involved with being an activist. Eris hadn't planned on joining a movement or even being an activist. Just over a year ago, she was still at UNC, University of North Carolina, in her third year studying for exams. She had been in Davis Library typing up answers to practice questions, and after taking a break to keep her anxiety in check, saw a demonstration occurring in the pit at the Graham Student Union. Several students had staged it on behalf of animal rights activists. They were protesting some of the major cosmetic companies like Avon, Chanel, and CoverGirl for using chemicals in their products that they first tested on rabbits and mice. The group referred to themselves as biocentrists, which meant that they believed that life and the life of the earth come before industrial gain and profit. The protesters, some were students, some weren't, held large signs and cardboard posters of dead animals from exposure to the products. One sign read, "Real women don't wear makeup," and another read, "Natural beauty is real beauty," which had a photo of a rabbit sitting in a meadow gnawing some grass. Eris got lured into protesting with them. It was as if the crowd absorbed her, sucked her in somehow, like she was swimming in the ocean with the undertow swirling around her legs, her torso, and arms, dragging her toward the depths of an abyss. Resisting it meant a struggle. Giving in meant the opposite, something that felt right. After the protest had dwindled, she talked to some organizers, some of whom contacted her days later. They were with Earth First, an eco-defense group. The more she talked to the organizers of the protest, the more disillusioned she became by the politics of academia. She had been taking classes rooted in her professors' areas of study, writing seminar papers and annotated bibliographies to foster their publications. This wasn't dynamic, wasn't true learning. This was an oppressive road to a slow death, serving the needs of old white men. On the day of her exams, whatever stress she was feeling had ebbed after seeing the first question, which involved the Marxist theory as it related to the Soviet collapse and subsequent revolution in the early 1980s. All she had to do was write what her professors had been lecturing at her for the past 3 years to pass and move on to writing her dissertation. But this wasn't an advancement of thought. She wanted to see past events in a different light, a different theoretical framework. Her answer was merely one large paragraph. This is all bullshit. Copied and pasted 100 times. She finished out her semester of teaching and didn't return, happy about her newly gained sense of freedom. So they're still in the truck, and as they're driving to West York, because the bus depot is in actually a neighboring town, just close by. They pass by where the fracking is occurring, and then Boone has some questions, and Eris tells him some information. Boone actually offers his house to Eris if she needs a place to stay, but she avoids answering that because she's just met him. And then there's more discussions about the well sites and and the information that Boone hears from Eris kind of upsets him because he's not fully aware of like how severe it is. And then he wants to go grab a beer at this local tavern called Hubie's Tavern, and that's where this section begins. The parking lot contained more dirt, bottle caps, and cigarette butts than gravel. When Eris stepped out of the truck, the moist soil sucked her boots like quicksand. The building was made of planks of battered oak that smelled like mildew and were widening as if to escape from one another. A trail of muddy footprints had fossilized near the entrance, and a twisted gutter dangled across one side, slapping against the facade when the wind picked up. Boone and Eris entered, Eris standing close behind him, unsure of what to expect. The interior was dimly lit by fixtures suspended with steel wire from the marred, tiled ceiling. Ropes of cobwebs threaded along the grooves of the tiles, dangling from the sputtering fluorescent bulbs. Each fixture held flickering tubes, hoping to awaken. The interior was dark on purpose, Eris realized, affording the patrons their right to clandestine privacy. It took several seconds for Eris's eyes to adjust to the lighting, and when they did, she noticed several people staring at her, all men. Here we go again, she thought. She clutched her handbag tighter, pressing it into her body as if it were armor coating. They stepped to the L-shaped bar, the floorboards creaking in pain, sometimes muffled by the tinny sound of the jukebox or the hissing of the CO2 tanks. A musty odor lingered in the air, partially disguised by the stench of bleach. A squadron of fruit flies circled the wet draft tap, and Eris tasted the sour beer in the air. The bartender, a pudgy woman with buzzed blonde hair and extra blue eyeshadow, rang out the sale on an old-fashioned push-key cash register that cha-chinged as the drawer slid open. The bar top was a 4-inch slab of oak, coated and varnished with half dollars, quarters, and $2 bills scattered, suspended within the finish that was nicked and grooved from the desperate attempts of treasure hunting by drunken patrons. There were only 2 seats open, but they weren't next to one another. Boone suggested they sit at a small table in the back. Eris nodded and slung her handbag over her shoulder and walked to the table. She examined the area before she sat and watched Boone as he ordered. She slid her tablet from her handbag, not making eye contact with the male patrons, who were obviously staring at her. She hoped this gesture would indicate she was not interested. Sometimes this worked. Most times it didn't. She heard footsteps and sensed someone nearby. "Well, looky here," the man said in a southern drawl. She refused to look up. "You don't look like you're from around here." "I'm from Texas, sweetheart." She hesitated, doing nothing, hoping the man would leave. She knew if she looked up, she would have to talk to him, or at least tell him to get lost. "I'm a contractor," he said. "A pipe layer." She thought she heard him laugh. "I'm over at the Motel 6, room 332, he said. Still, Eris said nothing and swatted her arm as if he were a fly buzzing too close, invading her space. Shit, she thought. Obviously, the one hotel in town would be filled with out-of-town workers. Even if she were to get a room there, they would never leave her alone. She traced her fingers along the tablet screen, but this man, this pipe layer from Texas, would not leave. Finally, she looked up and he smiled wide, showing his yellowing teeth. "I knew you'd come around," he said. He chugged from a bottle of Bud Light. He wore jeans, a flannel shirt, and a bolo tie. His hair was dark brown, short, and parted at the side. "Come around to where?" Just as she said that, Boone arrived, cradling 2 glasses in the crook of his elbow, holding a pitcher of beer in his free hand. The man smiled. "Feisty, huh? I like that." "What's going on?" Boone asked. He rested the pitcher and glasses on the table. "None of your business, Grandpa," the man said, ignoring Boone. "I'm good at what I do, sweetheart. Pipe laying, that is." He smiled again. "Follow me. I'll show you." "I'll pass," Eris said. "Me and Grandpa here are trying to have a conversation." The man looked at Boone and snorted. He looked back at Eris. "Give me one good reason why you won't come back with me to my hotel room." Eris rested her tablet on the table, slowly raised her left hand and gesturing with her middle finger. The man's stupid smile finally began to fade. She sensed he was about to leave. "No, wait," Eris said, as she lifted her right hand, giving him the finger again. Here are two reasons why.
Yes.
The man's face turned slightly red. He looked over at Boone, who had a blank expression. Then he looked over at Eris. "Fucking dyke," he said, and walked away. They both watched him leave. Boone sat. "Boy, you're something else," he said. "If I were your dad, I'd be damn proud right now. Actually, I am proud of you, regardless." "That's good to hear," Eris said. "Because you know that offer you made earlier, the one about staying at your place?" Boone nodded, and before Eris could say anything, he spoke. "I'd be honored." So that's the ending of the second chapter with Eris. So we're going to move to Boone. These next two sections are shorter. And this is June 2014. And this kind of sets up the town and a little bit of the history of the town. And again, this is where he meets the surveying crew, but this section I'm reading won't actually get to that. Lionel Thaddeus Boone sat in the cab of his beat-up 1991 F-150, windows rolled up, AC blasting. He was parked just outside of Brackenfield Cemetery, where his wife, Lauren, had been buried 11 years ago. To this day, he never visited the grave, even though he promised himself every year he would. It was easy to make promises if no one else knew about them. It was also easy when the promise was weeks away. No, even a month. No immediacy present, so it felt like it wasn't real. And it was easy to justify breaking that promise. No, renegotiating it. When your anxiety crept up, increasing as the moment loomed closer, eventually paralyzing you. Visiting his wife's grave would mean he'd have to visit the graves of his parents, his older brother, his brother-in-law, and all his friends and co-workers who died too young in the Marshall coal mine collapse of 1994. Every time he passed the cemetery, Boone felt the presence of death. At 54, he felt it creeping up on him, catcalling his consciousness, especially when peering into the cemetery entrance, its narrowing roadway overcrowded by sumac, possum haw holly, and switch cane, its rusted iron gates permanently cast open like a mouth waiting to feed. Years grinded as he shifted into drive. Over the last few years, more and more parts of his truck had deteriorated. The motor was still in good shape, and at nearly 150,000 miles, but Boone brought it regularly to Lloyd Graham's Amoco and made sure the oil was changed at least twice a year, the transmission flushed, along with frequent tune-ups and front-end alignments. However, it was the oxidation that began to wear down the body and frame, and now the axles and the rotors were showing signs of weathering. He spun the truck around and headed west on State Route 268, back into the town of West York, Kentucky. He passed the remains of the old ruined drive-in. A few white pickup trucks were parked in the grounds near the 20-foot neon sign. A half mile later, the road curved north. Boone passed the Breckenridge Trailer Park. Up ahead were more trailers, and as he got closer to the downtown district, houses. He pulled to a stop at 2nd Avenue, parallel to the Cumberland grain plant, and turned left, slowly making his way to the other side of the town, driving parallel to the flood wall 1 block north. Just beyond the flood wall was the Ohio River. West of the river was Indiana, and a few miles south stood the majestic Shawnee Forest, its rows of royal green oak and hickory positioned like nature's sentries on the bottom edge of Illinois. West York, whose population once peaked at 3,800, but was now below 3,300, found itself to be a flagship town in a tri-state area where it shared the norms and beliefs of their home state while adopting the values and principles of others, rendering the residents connected, yet separate from their indigenous neighbors. Boone glided past the First Union Bank and Dino's Soda Shop. He thought about stopping at Huey's Tavern, but it was barely 1 in the afternoon, too early for a beer. Besides, as he made his way past the police station and Creary's Shipping and Supplies, where he worked part-time, he knew all along what his intention was: Rust Bucket Inn for a cup of coffee and a slice of peach pie. For a 4-week period starting the week of Father's Day and ending in mid-July, the Rust Bucket Inn offered pie made with peaches from an orchard just south of town. Over time, the Peach Pie Festival became a tradition as it reminded people that the summer season, with all its promises of freedom and relaxation, was in full swing. During the first week of the festival, there was a limit of 1 slice per customer, and the line for a slice would start at the counter, continue through the entrance, and end within the gravel parking lot. But by the third week, the appeal wore off and the weather warmed, so people would flock to Dino's or the clay Cineplex and sit for hours in a building whose foundation had been etched in the chilled rock of an abutting hillside. By early July, Casey Stubbs, the owner of the Rust Bucket Inn, sold whole pies to anyone who wanted to buy one. Sometimes he would discount the price so they didn't throw any away. When she was alive, Lauren Ann Boone would buy 10 and freeze them so that during the colder, bleaker days of December through mid-March, she could defrost one every other week and be comforted by another warm day in the town she grew up in. So that's the Boone section, and that goes on where he meets the surveying group. And then the very last one, and this is short too, is from Cass. And this comes a little bit later. This is chapter 7, and this is September 2014, when the energy company is beginning to do some development. And as it turns out, her husband is hired by the energy company. So that's kind of why this starts off. And she's been through a lot. She's been traumatized, and this section will show that. At the age of 41, Cass Distill Taylor wrote in her journal to Cooper. With her husband and his affairs, with her hometown deteriorating around her, with her quickening age and fading beauty, with life's surging lack of appeal, its slow and inevitable path to permanent death. She no longer believed in God and religion, in the convenient binary of heaven and hell. People were not special. They were like any other species with a difference of consciousness, which simply meant we had the capability to create and build, not just inanimate objects, but a mythology to explain where they came from and where they would go. She didn't have this feeling just with the story of Adam and Eve. Science, to her, was another creation. It involved ingenuity, which is essentially invention. So she wasn't the type who held science over religion, pitting one against the other, claiming the former was superior to the latter. Her philosophy was simple. You came into the world, developed physically, mentally, and emotionally, and then you died. There was no one judging your actions or thoughts, no one determining what happened to you or your soul once you ceased to exist. You simply were until you simply weren't. But to keep up appearances, she remained a dedicated attendee and participated at the State Nursery Methodist Church. Sunday and holiday services, potlucks, rotaries, bingo nights, and other social events. Existing in a small town, she knew she had to keep her thoughts to herself, otherwise she would be outnumbered and an outcast. But living in such an environment often made it feel as if her thoughts and beliefs, her philosophy, wasn't real. So by writing things down in a journal, they became real, and most importantly of all, possessed sustainability. This meant that life was all about how people treated one another. She was a fifth-generation woman in a rural town in a red state where coal mining had been the main occupation. The role of who she was defined before she was born. And she accepted that, but she knew she deserved more for her efforts, for her patience, and for her sacrifices than she received so far. It's one thing to have outside forces disrupt the dynamics of the town she grew up in. But when locals traumatize locals, and loved ones abuse loved ones, that was anything but ethical. And as she aged, she learned that was something she did not have to endure. Just recently, she woke to a bed full of rose petals for the third time. They were sprinkled around the pillow and comforter, some stuck within the sheets, layering against her bare skin. They felt silky and smelled fresh, as if the flowers were cut hours ago, skinned for their beauty shortly after. But she knew that could not have been possible. Her husband, clearly the culprit, surprising her just like he had done the morning of their honeymoon when they stayed at the Brown Hotel in Louisville. That, no doubt, was a good memory. But the second time it was in their bedroom of their old house on Owsley Court, shortly after he ended his second affair with Susie Caldwell. That memory wasn't as good. They had only been married for a little over 2 years. He had been laid off from his job since Marshall Cole sold the mineral rights to Plain Mountain, and he couldn't find any work. He, along with everyone else, thought they would be hired by Freedom Energy, who had resumed coal operations, but they didn't practice standard mining. Longwall mining is what they called it. No, they used a different process that was more efficient and required less help. Even after they left and Elliott coal took over, there wasn't a need for many miners because there wasn't much coal left in those depleted seams. That's when many ex-miners fell on hard times. Some took to drinking all day while some experimented with crack cocaine. Wade was never much of a drinker and never touched drugs. His outlet had always been sex, which would have been fine if it was only with Cass. She had known Wade since elementary school, and they began dating in their early teens. First, there was Annie Grayson, the homecoming queen, under the bleachers when the West York Eagles played the Tazewell Tigers. Then it was Whitley Knott, who worked as a maid at her mom's Motel 6. But the one that bothered Cass the most was the on and off affair with Susie Caldwell. Wade never returned to the others, just to Susie. And until she died, she had lived 3.5 blocks away from their trailer on Edmondson Lane. Susie was 4 years younger than Wade, 3 years younger than Cass, and as fate would have it, the only job Cass could get to pay their bills was waitressing at the Rust Bucket Inn, working side by side with Susie's daughter, Judy. Cass felt bitter for having to endure such irony. That's truly what it was. But she, like a lot of women in West York, convinced themselves that her husband's indiscretions were not his fault. It was the town, its lack of opportunities, its oppressive culture. If things were different, then he would be different. Thank you. That's it. I was told it was going to be like from 12 to 1, so I can answer any questions people have any. Yeah. Yes, I do. I should mention, I have some books. If people want to buy a copy, you can sign them. They're $20. Yeah. Oh, thank you. Thanks. Okay, and that's also, yeah.
So, have you been reading this out? Have you been doing readings out? I think you have been. We're Facebook friends, but have you met with people who are in favor of the crafting industry and they don't like your take on this?
Oh yeah, every time I go to a local bar and have a drink, and and honestly, I met a lot of these people as I was writing this book, and they indirectly informed some of my characters. And we had a conversation. I realize the fact that we are heavily dependent on energy as a nation, so much that we can't escape it. Like, I think solar and wind is a good supplement, but the thing that bothers me the most is that energy companies don't take the necessary don't follow the regulations. They just do it for profit. So they cut a lot of corners, which then leads to a lot of damage and destruction of the environment and death. Whereas if they still follow all the protocols, there would still be some damage, but not as much, and they would still make a great profit. But it's a gross profit. When I say gross, I mean unbearable, like nasty. So yeah, I've met a lot of people that aren't very happy about this. I've actually met with someone who was a surveyor for a fracking company, and we agreed to disagree.
Yeah, I just wondered how that reaction was, because it is not be very about something that you have strong feelings on.
Yeah.
That risk of having people, not like you. People that you do that.
Yeah, I think I benefit from the same reason why I benefit when in the classroom. I'm like 6 foot, over 200 pounds, man, and I look like I'm the next year from The Sopranos. So people tend not to give me any.
You're good.
Problem. Yeah, I have that privilege. There's a question.
Yeah, you seem to do a good job of getting into the mind of Cass, a female. When you're writing a novel, how do you get your mind into switching from a male to a female to a male? Is that a tough thing for an author?
It's not. It's getting easier the more I do it, and I think, like, for example, with the first paragraph of each of those, in the Eris section and the cast section, I just got into the zone, so to speak, and the character just kind of takes over. And I think Christina was saying this about Jennifer High's characters. I think it's something that Keats, I think it was Keats who labeled it negative capability, which he said Shakespeare was doing. You just imagine yourself, being in someone else's shoes, and then I'm the youngest in a loud Italian family, so no one ever listened to me. So I just kept my mouth shut and observed what was going on. And as a result, I like, what is it like to be someone who's lived in this town their entire lives? Because we're socially conditioned by our surroundings, and I became well aware of that when I moved away. About 5 years later, I was behaving in certain ways and doing certain ways. I'm like, why am I doing these things? Why am I acting this way? It's because of the culture that I was surrounded by. So I'm fortunate enough to have moved around quite a bit. I'm from Long Island originally, West Babylon, and New York, so you can see where West York comes into play. But I had lived in rural Pennsylvania. That's where I got my bachelor's. I lived in North Dakota. I met Christina in Athens, Ohio. That's where I got my PhD, and then I was at University of Kentucky. Now I'm here, and I feel that those moves have really informed me and have educated me beyond books can educate me. And I'm thankful for that. Sure. Any other questions? I can't see. Oh yeah.
Did you go through any formal education for writing?
Just pretty much what I do now is I teach creative writing. So I did my bachelor's was just writing in general. I think bachelor's in English and writing, and then my master's was still English, but the emphasis was creative writing, and then my PhD was creative writing. So you submit, you enroll, I should say, in a bunch of classes that are called workshops. You do some readings, you submit work, people critique your work, then you get feedback, and then you write a larger piece. It's a process that's cyclical. You do it over and over again. And now I'm in the position where I'm sort of mentoring younger writers.
So to get your PhD, do you need to write an original work then for your doctorate?
Yeah. It was about 200 pages, but like 50 pages was a critical introduction, which I explored several fiction writers and put them in context of my writing, and it's definitely different than what we consider an academic dissertation. Some people don't see it as the same thing. I think it's definitely different. I think it's more like a fine arts type of product. It just happens to house itself in English departments. So I don't think I could ever write an academic dissertation. Yeah.
So did fracking replace mountaintop removal? And if so, what's going to replace fracking?
Hopefully solar and wind. Not exclusively, but yeah, one of the things I mentioned in my novel is, I think it's the 2012, might be 2013, because it was the 2012 election, Barack Obama's State of the Union address, and he talked about how fracking was going to be the new method of energy extraction, and we were going to be like world leaders in energy. And that was, and I think the writing was on the wall in the late, like 2007, 2008, that coal mining was, people were looking at it and seeing how much damage it was doing to the environment. And then, like Jennifer Hay puts in her book, the fracking industry got a couple of scientists together and said, hey, this is a cleaner form of energy. And if you look closely, all that diesel fuel that's being burned to extract all that energy, that's creating hazardous conditions. So, there's still mountaintop removal going on in coal extraction, but I think fracking has been the predominant one for the last decade or so. And I guess, fingers crossed we can find something that's just better for the planet.
So mountaintop removal had its downside that its damage was done. Fracking, obviously, from what you're saying, is doing damage
Mhm.
and such. What solar, is solar gonna do damage?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm not an engineer. I'm not a physicist or geophysicist, I guess. But I mean, I think anything. I think if you get energy and you store it in batteries, then it's up to like corporations to make sure all that's safe. And corporations just cut corners all the time. You know, some don't, but you know, they just they've got to answer to the stockholders and things like that, and they want to make as much profit. This is a boom. What I've learned is that energy extraction is a boom or bust business. So if there's not enough money to be made, energy companies won't bother with it. Yeah.
I live in Palm Street. There was 5 and stuff.
I'm sorry, what?
When I was 5, we lived in Palm Street. The skies were literally gray and smoky from the coke plant.
Yeah.
And the water was horrible. I remember cleaning off the microwave thinking it had glitter on it, but it was graphite. And when I think of fracking now, we should have learned through that you need to regulate it first before you do it. I mean, my ex worked at the coke plant,
Yeah.
fed my kids and my family, but a lot of people are dying of cancer now.
Yeah.
You know, my brother worked at titanium, he's got cancer.
Yeah.
And I keep thinking that we would just take the time to regulate before it started. But
Yeah.
money signs show up and
Yeah.
it's history.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And unfortunately, there are a lot of things that the side effects take years.
Yes.
Like the mountaintop removal, one of the biggest things was the slurry impoundments, and how so many were made and they weren't built up to the standards that they were supposed to be built in, and they leached into waterways, which was the main drinking water, and then 3 years later,
Yeah.
people start developing cancer. Yeah. Other questions? We probably have time for maybe one more. If we're going to one, I don't know. I'll stay here.
Just say, are we ever gonna learn?
I think that's the great question. It's probably the fundamental question of humanity. Will we ever? Probably, some of us will. Ideally, we can elect the best people, but yeah, I think we seem like I think we keep reinventing the wheel every generation. So. Well, thank you very much.
By the way, we're making a commercial tomorrow at Heritage Florida. I forgot to mention that. If you'd like to be on in the video. We just need a group of people to sort of promote, 2 o'clock is the West Virginia swing, right?
Yes, by West Bank.
By the West Bank. Come on down.
Props will be provided, I guess.
Yeah, Mark's
She was saying. And I said, well, I've never been there to see it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
One guy sitting around. We didn't talk every day.
I think
You're lucky you didn't break your.
I think sometimes you're on your regular. Just what I said. Ask for an ear infection. No, because you're in infection too. Yeah, that does it too. Yeah, that's right. Is there anything else we need to do tomorrow?
No. There's a, he's part, he's one of the
Actually, all of them.
Yeah.
You're doing things too, huh? Yes. You don't want to put all that liquid down. No, I just got It's not a convenient time. That's true. And it's gonna.
I think it's just gonna keep lawyers busy for years.
People make money, but it's not people. So nobody's going down there.
Thinking about commercial about
Thank you.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I'm
At
so bad.
ASA, I was talking to Chris Green.
Oh, okay.
I was talking to her this evening. I see your name all over.
Small state, as you come down. So you know what, are retired. So you got your lawn as well.
I think it's a good Ron is so she ran a bus or
I know they're doing celebrations around here as well. It's nice to mention Misha.
Can you guys, can somebody eat these? Would somebody eat these?
Probably not.
No? Alright, I shouldn't eat them, that's why I'm trying to give them away. Somebody gave them to me and I ate one or two and they're very good, which is the problem. Alright. Good job.
Thank you.
There's a lot of us.
I didn't mean to interrupt. Yeah, I get it, huh? You know what, I have my nephew's house in Florida, and then I actually have a house down here, but I don't do and on my schedule, but if I leave it, if I can down the road, there's nowhere. I'm like, I my daughter's one out of town. The other one says she doesn't want to go. This man told me I have to look out.
It doesn't really. They use the printing there. I don't know.
Yeah, because I can get it to you as long as that. Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay, great. See you. Give me a hug.
I don't
Well, she was here. Was she? Well, I was.
Yeah, that's one of those things I need to get. I got asked about it. I think I was working on that something else. Nobody's really written. They will look at me.
And then I can buy a ticket or something else. There you go. See you, Pam.